From the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. It is such a pleasure and a delight to have our distinguished guest, Natalye Paquin, here with us today. We're also thrilled to welcome all of you to the webinar. My name is Dr. Una Osili. I'm the Associate Dean for Research at the Lilly Family School and have the honor of serving as the Dean's Fellow at the Mays Institute on Diverse Philanthropy, where we seek to change the narrative around communities of color and underrepresented populations in philanthropy through sharing research, training, and educational outreach. So that is just a brief introduction. I am really excited about our conversation today. We're going to be talking about a topic that does not get as much attention. So welcome, Natalye. Welcome to the school virtually. Of course, it would have been great to do this in person, but we are going to do the best we can. I should also just start with a very brief bio. You have accomplished so much and there's so much to talk about, but just a few highlights. Natalye is the CEO and president of Points of Light Foundation based in Atlanta. Before that role, she served as the Chief Transformational Officer of the Girl Scouts nationally in the USA. She has a long and extensive career in civil rights work in the education sector, working with the US Department of Education. She's worked with large school systems around the country, including Chicago Public Schools. She serves on a number of boards in the government sector, in the corporate world, and in the nonprofit world. She has had the pleasure of working in the communities that she serves, so she knows them quite well, and also with institutions of all different types. Her degrees, she has a degree in law from DePaul Law School and an undergraduate degree from Florida A&M University. I've done my homework. Natalye, welcome. Just so pleased to have you. And one quick bio fact that's not on her CV, but I did have the pleasure of learning about. She's a proud IU mother in the sense that her son graduated from both the O'Neill School and Kelly School just recently in 2017. So you are part of the IU family and we are pleased to welcome you virtually. Welcome again to our audience. Welcome to all of you who have joined. Let's just go right into our questions for today. And the very first question is a question that we'll ask Natalye to just reflect on her experiences, her career, what led her into this leadership role at Points of Light, what factors drove her to this job, and what has allowed her to be a visionary leader, and what advice can she share for many of you in the nonprofit world, in the fundraising world, and also students who may have joined today.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Osili. It's really wonderful to be a guest of the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. It's just a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Let me first start sharing just a little bit about Points of Light for those who might not be familiar with Points of Light. We are a global nonprofit. We work with corporations, social impact agencies, and individuals. We are one of the largest nonprofits that are focused on volunteerism and civic engagement. We have affiliates, a network, a global network that is in over 200 cities in 38 countries. And each year through our corporate partners and our nonprofit partners, we actually engage over 5 million volunteers a year, and they contribute over 16 million hours of volunteer service to communities. Now, what led me to this organization is really the fact that I got into this space as a volunteer. You know, frequently we are just working and doing what it is that we're required to do professionally. And, you know, when you actually volunteer and lend your time and talent to other initiatives, you learn more about those initiatives and people learn more about you. And from my volunteer service, I was invited to join a nonprofit organization, the Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts. And really that sort of turned the corner for me, and I just got into this space. One other thing I will share with you just about kind of my values and what I was taught as a young girl, which was all about education and hard work and giving back. You know, philanthropy, I think, is love in action. And I was taught to whom much is given, much is required. And so the work with this organization and the work in the nonprofit space is really very aligned with my values.
Excellent. I'm so glad we got to hear some of those highlights, the points of light, the goals, the mission of the organization, and then your affinity to the organization. In this moment in history, we have a number of factors taking place: a global pandemic, so a health crisis, economic crisis, and also a social and racial justice movement. And so all of these factors combined have disrupted all of our daily lives. And if you think about volunteering, it's a critical component of philanthropy. As you said, the love of humanity. But volunteering has also had to evolve during this time. So I thought you might also mention how Points of Light is pivoting, perhaps with virtual volunteering, other ways that individuals can still engage in the causes that matter to them. But I just thought that would be important to share up front.
Yes, sure. Well, 3 years ago when I joined Points of Light, we went on a strategic learning, strategic planning process, and we were working with a large consultant. We actually reached out to over 100 constituents, which was community leaders, our board, our staff, people who had volunteered with us. And, you know, we were looking at a little bit of the data and learned that, 63 million Americans volunteered, but so many more said that they wanted to be engaged in other ways. And so at that time, while we were focused primarily on volunteerism, we had to ask ourselves a very critical question. And that question was, do we want to be who we want to be, or do we want to be who the world needs us to be? And in answering it in the latter, which is, if we want to be who the world needs us to be, what else can we, how else can we look at volunteerism and civic engagement? And that, I guess, epiphany required us to ask ourselves just another question, which was not just about how do you get more people to volunteer, but how do you remove barriers to make it easy for people to be civically engaged? And in focusing in on barriers and a new way people are civically engaged, we developed, it's called a Points of Light Civic Circle Framework. And that framework is about engaging people to feel holistic and authentic in how they show up for causes they care about. And that framework also, talks about how people can leverage their voice to advocate, how people can donate, and also with donating, you can raise matching funds, how you might vote, whether or not a person is engaged in service, whether it's AmeriCorps or the Peace Corps or the military, choosing a place to work that is aligned with your values. And so what we're learning, and I think much of the headlines today proves this out, is that there's so many more ways we can lean into an issue that is on top of volunteering. And so our Civic Circle framework is about that.
So glad you shared that. First of all, what does the world need right now? Thinking through that process, and your idea of the continuum of ways that people can contribute: their time, their talent, their voice, and of course their treasure. And that's something at the Lilly Family School. We certainly understand that philanthropy is all of those things and more. One of our conversations in preparing for this particular one, you emphasize the role that communities are playing right now. We have had an opportunity to see communities come together around the pandemic, around the racial and social justice movement, but also natural disasters that have taken place in Texas, in Tennessee, throughout the country. And you had a phrase that stayed with me in our phone conversation. I have been reflecting on it since. You said community is queen.
Yes.
And you have learned through this crisis that how communities build or before the crisis allows them to recover and allows them to be resilient. So it's sort of the idea that we need to build these linkages even before the crisis, because that ability to come together is what sustains a community. So I'm just paraphrasing what you said about the community as the center and giving space to communities. And I just wanted to allow you to share your reflections, what you've seen, what makes communities as we look ahead to recovery and rebuilding communities. What should we learn or take away from?
Yes. So, so if you reflect on the phrase, which it is a catchy phrase, I think it's a wonderful metaphor, because when people think about a queen, they think about something that is revered, something that you hold up. And what we've learned through our research and our experience is that people in community, when you revere your community, when you hold up your community, you really recognize that it is the center of everything. What we've learned about disasters, natural or man-made, is that the issues that are occurring in community are just amplified, and the need to address them is accelerated in in times of crisis. And so we are always encouraging people to learn more about their community. Last year, we actually did a research. We surveyed over 1,400 people to get more of a sense about our civic circle framework and how they were feeling about community, civic engagement, and a lot of different things. And I will share with you and the Lilly family of the School of Philanthropy that one of the things that we learned was that people say that they think globally, but they want to act locally. And so over 55% of the respondents said that their preference was to act locally and focus on issues that impacted their community, versus 18% of the respondents actually said that they would prefer to contribute their time and resources to global issues. And so we do think that that it's a very big indicator that while you may look for best practices globally, all issues, all politics, all action, it's all local. And so don't forget the community.
So we should all remember community is queen, but also philanthropy is local, and people want to act locally. We are seeing local communities come together. I think that's an important message that you stressed when we talked earlier. One other point that I have been reflecting on, and I would love to hear your thoughts on, is that we've also had corporations take a more visible role in the face of the pandemic and all the other issues that communities are facing. And at Points of Light, we learned that you have an award every year that you give out to corporations that are making an impact in our various communities around the world. In particular, I wanted you to share that process of selecting the Civic 50 honorees. It must have been a tough year to do this work, because there was so much to reflect on and select from. So just wanted to hear how you went about that, whether there are any important takeaways or lessons, and what examples you can lift up from those Civic 50 honorees this year in 2020. Last year, I should say.
Yes, sure. So first I will share that the Civic 50 is about civic engagement for companies, private and public, whose assets are over $1 billion, and those who respond to a survey that we have. We do work with a partner, and so the evaluation and the selection is done with our partner, who's very independent. The process is really about assessing, and let me just finish that. The process is really about assessing 4 particular areas: a company's integration, investment, institutionalization, and impact of how they are engaging with community. And so when we look at institutionalization, what we're talking about is how does a company institutionalizes its community engagement and its social impact programs through policies and systems and incentives. When we talk about investment, we're asking the question, how does the company strategically invest its resources in community engagement and social impact? And this includes employee giving time as well as cash and in-kind. When we talk about integration and evaluating integration, this is about how the company integrates its community engagement and social impact programs in its business functions and its interests. I would give as an example a rideshare company, and their social impact program may be one where they are taking first responders to work free, or supporting first responders who have children and taking their children to daycare, right? And so they're integrating those their policies into their business functions and interests. And then the last area that we look at is impact, which is how does the company measure the social and business impact outcomes of its community engagement programs. One of the things that we learned from our Civic 50 award and recognition, and we're also seeing this again today, is that business has a critical role to play in advancing civic engagement. And, a couple of statistics I'll share with you about the honorees in terms of how they benchmark with other companies is last year, our 2020 honorees, they gave over $2 billion in cash. They donated over $5.6 billion in in-kind support. Their investment in employee volunteerism and engagement, their employees supported community. They gave over 11 million hours of community engagement. And then a couple of other statistics I think you might find interesting is over 74% of the respondents actually said that their community engagement policies and practices are aligned and included in performance reviews. So think about that, right? And over 80%, I think it was 82%, said that they at least one time presented the impact and the work that the company was doing to the board at the highest level for governance. And so, what we're seeing is that our Civic 50 honorees are walking the talk. They're investing, they're integrating, they're aligning and measuring impact.
So alignment is key here. How do you bring all of your work in advancing the social good? And that's what you're capturing. Are there any examples that you can lift up? I know you mentioned the ride sharing companies, but are there any examples that could be a model for those who want to do that type of work, integrating advancing the social good and civic engagement across all of their work? Any companies that stand out, whether local or global companies?
Well, I think the main key is to think about the framework that you have. Like in addition to the LIFT program, we do have, let's just say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that, a company, a rideshare company. You could have a company that has excess inventory, and if you have excess inventory of a product, you may want to incentivize families or people to be civically engaged and use the excess product as incentives, right? So there's so many different ways that companies actually align their interests. You could be a company that that has excess inventory that might be food. And then, so how do you properly donate or dispose of food so that you are minimizing waste?
Okay, so this is really about looking at all of your assets and how they can be mobilized in a time of crisis.
Yes, it is. And, you know, I would use as another example, let's just say a company is, has many stores or branches in communities. How do you use your building to allow the public to come in and hold meetings? You know, maybe the facility is more of a community center during off hours. And so there are all different ways that a company will look at their assets, look at the community needs, look at the employees' interests, and then develop strategies where they are aligned.
Okay, so this is what we're calling stakeholder mapping, and also looking at your internal stakeholders and external community, and making sure you have all of their voices at the table in crafting a strategy. So that's powerful. And we are seeing that across the nation. I think many companies are at least using some of those frameworks in making decisions. Well, let's turn our attention to the nonprofit world. We get a lot of questions. I certainly do. I'm sure you do. For nonprofits who are wanting to engage volunteers, one-time volunteers in some cases, but also sustained volunteers, volunteers that are regular and not just occasional. There's a lot of interest in volunteering right now, as you've even shared in terms of the percentage that would like to volunteer. What are some best practices, ideas that you're seeing work on the nonprofit side for engaging volunteers and developing that volunteer engagement? Because as you know, right now, nonprofits are seeing, in some subsectors, increased need, increased demand for their services, but they are also wanting to better understand how they can build those platforms for volunteers to engage.
Thank you. So first of all, I'd love to frame it, and I know you know this, but really about the impact of the nonprofit sector. The nonprofit sector employs about 10% of the American workforce. Each year, they spend $2 trillion. You know, $2 trillion every year. We have over 1.6 million, over $400 billion are contributed annually. And so we really have to understand the heft and the potential impact that this sector has. And here's something that we like to point out, Dr. Osley, is that nonprofits are run by volunteers. Volunteers, people who are your governing boards usually are volunteers. And so the bureaucracies that we that exist are bureaucracies that we have created. And these are good meaning volunteers. What we're asking our leaders is to think about the rules that you have in place, think about the policies that you have in place, evaluate them, and determine whether or not they are current, whether they should be revised, because unlike in other spaces where you it's difficult to pivot, it's difficult to be innovative and creative. In the nonprofit space, you can. And so we say, take advantage of that, understand your power. And just be creative. And we actually saw that this past year when we couldn't be in the same place physically, but we learned to create DIY projects. We learned to engage virtually. We leveraged technology. There were just so many different ways that we were able to continue to serve community. And that's what we encourage.
So let's drill down into that question a bit more. we have learned that for many nonprofits, it's not just about engaging volunteers, but they're also thinking about demographics. How can we bring younger volunteers to the table and engage those younger volunteers? Because we work in higher education, we see that younger people are very interested in social change and racial justice and making a difference. But many nonprofits are challenged in this area, engaging younger volunteers, and also in some cases, engaging a diverse pool of volunteer talent. And so that is also a question, how do organizations build that talent pipeline with younger, more diverse volunteers? And what are you seeing on the ground right now in terms of what's working in engaging that more diverse, younger volunteer base?
Sure. So I'll start with the really young, and then I'll move up to the young adults and give you two examples, right? So with the really young, we actually have a partnership. We've been in partnership with Disney, the Walt Disney World Company, for more than 2 decades now. Points of Light is about 30 years old, and so they are a signature partner, and we like to think that we're a signature partner with them. Um, Last year or 2 years ago, we actually co-created this experience where the Disney theme parks would support and offer tickets to families and to schools and to nonprofits who were individuals who were engaged in social good activities, who logged their hours and then submitted for park access. And so I'd have to send you the statistics, because there's a big report about the number of hours and the number of communities and the number of nonprofits who actually were engaged or more engaged. And so we can maybe link that with the recording. But what we're seeing is that there are ways to create programs that engage families and small groups and opportunities that then get them to work together and do more in that community and learn about their queen. The other example I would share with you is a program that we had with the Foundation. And a couple of years ago, it actually was almost 2.5 years ago, we co-created this, what would I call it? It was a volunteer hybrid work service program with Starbucks, where they would pay their employees for 20 hours of work, and then they would also pay their employees for 20 hours of community and service, because they believe that the employee, they call them a partner, who was more engaged in the community, who understood the community, actually was a better partner for the business. And it was a better investment of their time. And so these paid fellowships, Points of Light was able to facilitate it with our nonprofits and our global network. These paid fellowships really was about investing in young adults who sometimes just don't have the time, because they need to be working, right? They don't necessarily know where to go, but they have the desire to get involved. And so again, this was a place where the Starbucks Corporation was investing in their employees to really support their queen, their community. What we like about both of those examples is it is evidence of the question that we have, which is, how do you remove barriers to make it easy for people to be civically engaged? And so those would be two examples I'd share.
I love those examples, especially the ones engaging young volunteers. One of the questions that we have also been thinking about at the Lilly Family School is, what are the benefits to those young people of engaging in volunteering, of being civically engaged? We have, as you know, the philanthropy panel study that follows young people through their childhood and early adulthood. And we do that young people who are engaged civically end up with better educational outcomes and career outcomes. But I just wondered if you could share with us, certainly there's a lot of research about why civic engagement is important, but for those individuals, especially young people who are saying, why should I get involved? Why should I volunteer? Is there a message that you can craft based on what you've seen with any of these examples, or even just the work you're doing at Points of Light?
Yes, it is so that that you'll get to your higher self, a better you, the best of yourself. And so through service and volunteerism, you're developing more empathy. We say this is where empathy replaces apathy. You are also meeting people that you normally would not meet. And so we talk about diversity and equity and inclusion. And, one thing that I will say about my volunteer experience is you can be around the table with a working mom and a billionaire, and you both love that tree the same. Or you both love, saving pets the same. And so there is an opportunity for you to meet people that you would never come in contact with through your daily routines. You are also, as a young person, developing skills that you may not be able to develop in your regular daily routines. And so those skills and experiences are also making you a richer person. And, I just think that there's joy in giving, there's joy in serving. I'm sure there's research about what it does to your physical and brain activity, but I think I'd start there.
Yes, there is a wealth of evidence that volunteering also improves health. One of our colleagues here at the Lilly Family School, Dr. Sarah Conrad, has been studying the impact of volunteering, and especially looking at the motivations for volunteering and how that affects the outcomes that individuals are able to experience. So I'm glad you wove all of those facets in. And I wanted us to also look ahead. We have been in the pandemic for the past 12 months, but communities are starting to get access to vaccines, and we're starting to see individuals return to schools and workplaces, and also start to engage in communities in a physical way. What is the future of volunteering as you look ahead? Are we still going to have the hybrid options available, mentoring online, volunteering online, or do you think we will return to perhaps a more face-to-face? I'm just very interested in what patterns you think will endure after the pandemic, what pivots may be necessary, or just what that future and perhaps next 12 months look like. And for those nonprofits who are on the webinar today, they may be wondering what that might look like, what they should be thinking about as they start to engage perhaps in-person volunteers.
Yes, sure. Well, I would invite them to visit our research at pointsoflight.org and also take a look at our civic engagement research. In that research, I think as I shared earlier, we surveyed over 1,400 respondents. It was an oversampling of Gen Z and millennials. And here's what we learned about the future. First of all, there's a question about volunteerism, but there's really a question about civic engagement. And Gen Z and millennials will not accept the world as we are delivering it to them. They're just not. I think 40% of Gen Z said that they had participated in at least 5 or more civic engagement experiences in the last year. This outpaced all of the other generations, because we went back silent generation, Gen X, baby boomers, millennials, Gen Zs. And 30% of millennials said that they had taken action, and that over 90% of the respondents, all respondents, said that they were going to be as engaged or more engaged post-pandemic. So what we see as for the future, the insights, is that people will continue to be engaged. Humanity will not be denied. Humanity wants to serve humanity, and humanity will look for, I believe, the easiest places to connect. And so that may be volunteering, but it's also a voice. It's also people voting. It's also people offering their treasures, whether it's skilled volunteering or donating or raising funds. And so we think that the future is very bright, and I'm quite hopeful. I think, are you on mute?
That's excellent. No, can you hear me? Okay,
I can hear you.
perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that very optimistic message. We have a very, I would say, excited group on our call today from all walks of life. We have fundraisers, nonprofit executives, students, and all interested in philanthropy parties engaged today. And so I'm going to ask them to send in their questions, and especially questions that focus on volunteerism. It's a topic that we keep hearing about. We haven't had the opportunity to discuss. And we know that philanthropy is about fundraising, but it's also about volunteering. And in fact, I'm so glad you raised this. If you think about the word itself, it's love of humanity. So I'm going to encourage our audience today, regardless of which seats you occupy, to send in your questions, and we will start to take them as we get them in. I did want to have one last question to ask about, and this is as President and CEO at Points of Light, you've had this sort of big picture view of what volunteering looks like before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now going forward. But you've also been a board member, you've been a donor, you've been a parent, and worn so many hats during this period. What are you also learning as a volunteer yourself in terms of how to support organizations? Because that's another question that we keep getting is, I want to support an organization in the arts or in maybe food insecurity or social justice. What message would you have to those individuals who want to be equipped to support their organizations? Where can they find resources, or what can they do to be more effective as volunteers?
Yes. So, well, one of the things that we know is the number one reason why people volunteer is because they're asked. They come back because they know that they've made an impact. And if you give them a great experience, you may have them for a lifetime. At least they'll be a net promoter, right? So we would encourage you to invite a friend, ask someone to join you, or if you're looking for a place, let people know that you're interested in joining, you're interested in supporting. So just begin the conversation. Once you have a partner, like a champion, a partner, a friend to join you, or you're that partner joining a champion, be sure to communicate the impact. Be sure to let people know. So you want to close that loop about the experience. It's like, wow, what we did on Saturday, this is what happened. Or that note you sent, or that poster you helped create, this was the impact of that. Because people really need to know that their time, which is the most important commodity, was valued and is valuable. And then the third thing we would say is be prepared for that person who's going to show up. So if you're painting a school and you have let's just say 5 or 6 volunteers that are there on a Saturday, make sure the school is open. Make sure you have the paint and the brushes, and there's someone there to communicate everything. And so just be prepared for that extra resource, that human capital that is so interested in supporting you. And then when you have them, remember that they have other assets, that they have friends and they have families, they have a workplace. They may be interested in the politics and the policies that influence and impact your mission. And so be sure to leverage that aspect of those assets that that individual is bringing to your mission.
That's excellent. So let me just see if I can recap for our audience. Your volunteers are an asset. And you have to remember, in addition to providing the right environment, the proper engagement, maybe orientation for them, also remember that they are connected to networks and they have friends and family and workplaces, especially, that you can also tap into. And so for many nonprofits who are joining us today and thinking about how do they engage volunteers, it goes beyond that one individual. It's everyone they're connected to. How do you build linkages to engage that entire network? And so that is a fantastic point. But later this week, the school will be launching a new report on crowdfunding. And we are seeing the power of networks, especially with social media and the ability to get the word out to not just one person, but potentially even millions of people. We have all said today that everyone has a voice and everyone has influence. Whether you have one follower or a million, you still have somebody in your network that you can impact and make a difference.
Yes. Yes, they're all multipliers.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think this is a fantastic question. We have one question that has already come in, and the question is really, what are some creative ideas for recruiting volunteers that you have seen in terms of, yes, we know that once we bring them in, we have to engage them and provide proper tools and resources. But what about recruitment in the first place before you can even get to the engagement and the orientation and so forth?
Right. So, I would. The recruitment is almost like in fundraising, where you do your prospecting, you do your research and your prospecting, which is to know your community, and I don't mean necessarily your physical community, but the community and the opportunity within that community to of who might be interested, and then. Once you do your research and your prospecting, you meet people where they are, and and then you also make personal invitations. We used to say in the school district, right? I worked in Chicago and Philadelphia, that notification was not an invitation. So you can send out a flyer to parents, notifying parents of something. That wasn't the same as inviting parents to something. So notification is not invitation. So if you're really recruiting people, you have to make an invitation to join you more personal, not just a flyer and information about the opportunity to join. And then I would say, reach out to friends and look at your current circles. And if that isn't enough, at Points of Light, we do have a website. It's called engage.pointsoflight.org, and you put in your zip code and you find matching opportunities. There are other websites that also have matching opportunities, and for us, we give you opportunities and we also provide you with ideas.
These are all excellent ideas. I think that we are getting a few more questions coming in, so I want to jump right to them. Have you seen any really exciting virtual ideas for engaging volunteers? Many are still meeting virtually. And so when you think about organizations that have those limitations in their ability to gather in person, how are you seeing that some organizations are really building that sense of community, even in a virtual framework with their volunteers?
Yes, sure. So with some of the virtual experiences that we're seeing, one is to share information prior so people know what to expect, to be respectful of time, to basically make sure that you have an agenda. And if it is a long experience, a virtual experience, we've seen to break it up with some type of artistic expression and let there be some, we call it a surprise and delight. excuse me, but a surprise and delight, something that's a little unexpected in that virtual experience that then creates a stronger emotional connection, and then people want to go back. So don't use the experience just as a teach, but use it as a real way to reach and try to emote as much as you can. You know, the ideas specifically that we've seen, of course, there's all types of skills-based volunteering. So there's tutoring. You know, we actually at our office actually had an experience where we were creating some artistic cards that would then go to people who were emotionally isolated, or people in communities that you don't necessarily have access to. And so I would say, remember that when you are building and having a shared virtual experience, creating a product or something that will then be shared with another community, it's all good. That community will feel it just as you felt it in the creation and the shared experience.
Wow, there's so much here to digest and take in. The notification is not an invitation. It has to be personal. Surprise and delight is really a great one, with so many people on Zoom for work, having to get on Zoom for your volunteer experience. Making it fun and personal really does seem to be an important issue here. And then there's also the question that you've raised about empathy and how you build that virtually, making connections with people, and also making it personal, tying it back to the things that they care about and the needs in the community. I think we are also getting another question that is a very important one. We've touched on it already, but it is something that we're hearing a lot about. And that's the question of, as we talked about, recruiting younger volunteers, younger talent, but then you may also have older volunteers who've served for a longer period of time and may not necessarily be as well equipped to serve the needs. How do you handle that, you could say, strategy to recruit new members, but also cultivate that sense of belonging for those who have been there for a long time and may also be in a position to perhaps step down, but are still very interested in being involved? What are some strategies for handling these very sensitive, sometimes recruitment/engagement opportunities?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, at Points of Light internally, and I have seen this in the sales sector space, we have this like strategy. We call it R before T. You know, if you think about the alphabet, R comes before T. There's RST, and the R before T is for us is relationships before tasks. And so when you have these intergenerational, sometimes creative conflict, you know, just places where people are not, they don't believe they're aligned, and maybe they aren't aligned. We would ask and encourage you to focus on the relationship before the task. Because when you really get to know a person and get to know the motivation, right? You assume good intent. What you may learn is you both want to go the same place, but you just have a different idea about how to get there. And, you know, so we would say relationships before task. The other, I guess, strategy that we would encourage is we call ones before fives, like ones and fives. And so a one is something that you're really good in, and a five is something you're really not good in. For both sets of people, to really understand your ones and understand your fives and understand the other person's, you know, strengths or weaknesses or strengths and opportunities, and then focus in, you know, see where there are redundancies and gaps, and focus in on the gaps or the redundancies and see how you can leverage that. And again, it goes back to asset mapping of each
Yes.
other and your talents.
those are all fantastic. The relationships before task is something that is so vital. And I think many nonprofits are very attuned to building relationships, but also understand that that takes time. And another related question is this one I get quite a bit, so I'm sure you have heard, how do you turn from volunteering time to also getting these individuals to be involved in other aspects of the organization, whether that's advocacy or donations of financial resources or other types of commitments. So this idea of certainly volunteers have many assets, but what are those strategies that can help? We know certainly the two are correlated, giving money and giving time, but there is this question of which has to come first and how do you build that relationship so that there is the ability to engage with that individual or family in all of the ways that they can support the organization.
Yeah, sure. You know, what we do, Dr. Osley, is we ask a really important question of our donors and people who are across the table. And I do this specifically with my board. And the question is, are we leveraging your talents and skills and interests in a way you imagined, in a way you envisioned? Not what we want, but that person at the table, they're there because they want to be helpful. They're there because they're bringing some talents and skills and passion and interest to the table, and they want to offer it. Usually as the nonprofit leader, we're sitting around the table and, you know, we have our agenda and we have our goals, we have our objectives, we know what we want. And then we're thinking about the people around the table. Well, who can give me this and who can give me that and where can I get that? You have to actually flip the script and you have to ask that person who is so generously donating their time and bringing their talent, are we leveraging you in a way you imagine? And when we ask that question, we learn so much more. We learn that our musician is married to a scientist, or maybe the musician is also a scientist, or maybe the scientist is a musician. You know, we learn the various dimensions of our donors and, you know, what else they have to offer. And then if we are creative, because remember, we're in charge, and these nonprofit philanthropic organizations, it's like, well, what do we want to do? What's the right thing to do? The bureaucracies that we have are created. You know, when we think that way, we can actually change how we are approaching and take advantage of so much more.
That is very inspiring. You have actually done this and been successful. So we can really build on the words of wisdom you've shared. It is about learning and listening and hearing what your donors actually want from their experience. Extrapolating, because I know we are almost out of time, is there also a message for nonprofits who want to engage their communities as a whole in their work, and what they do right now to really listen and learn from, learn about communities' needs? As you said, your organization went down this path and really asked, what does our community need? What advice would you share for organizations who are really wanting to lean into learning about their community, listening to we keep hearing about, as you said, community is queen, is my takeaway from this conversation. Well, one of my many takeaways, but certainly something that will stay with me. How can organizations, nonprofits who really deeply feel that urgency of that call from your discussion today, what can they do as a next step after this conversation?
Thank you. I think that the main thing is to recognize the power of one, that one act, like no act is too small, and every action matters, and every one person, like one individual, matters. Collectively, there's power, and there's no greater power than the power of people. And so the individual that is in front of you as a volunteer or a board member or, you know, a recipient, that individual has power and every act matters. And so we would, you know, encourage you to take advantage of that and yeah, leverage it as much as you can.
All right. Well, this is really important for all of us to take these lessons to heart and start to implement them. I have taken notes throughout our conversation today. I've learned so much. And I just want to ask you one last question. We just have a few minutes left, but just one last question, which is more of a reflection. What have you learned as a leader during this time, just about your own ability to guide an organization? And also, what would you ask others to do? What call to action do you have for our community here at the Lilly Family School and the world as a whole? So your own lessons learned, but also what call to action do you have for all of us?
I think my biggest lesson and the call to action would be to recognize love as a verb. Like, that's what I saw in 2020. Like, love showed up. I use, my leadership is about love, but I do think that I see, and if we share love as a verb through our leadership, it'll just make the world a better place.
So philanthropy, if we go back to the beginning of this conversation, means love of humanity. Yes. And one point we see in every community around the world is that it is a core value: generosity, helping others, serving others. And volunteering is a way right now, especially, where individuals of all backgrounds can play a role in improving our world. So thank you for this inspiring call to action, practicing what we teach at the School of Philanthropy, which is the love of humanity. And then very practical, I think, suggestions, advice, and recommendations that you've provided. As I shared, I have just taken hold of this message that we need to embrace our communities and really to their strengths and talents and build resilience before a crisis even happens in a community. I've also taken away the idea of engagement. In other words, I think you have said, looking at all the assets that individuals bring, and that no act is small. So recognizing the power of the individual and the power of community as well. So lots of wisdom, lots of learning. And I just encourage you to stay involved with our community. We'll certainly be reaching out to you on a number of projects at the school that we're working on, including, as we shared at the beginning, the Mays Institute on Diverse Philanthropy. So with that, we are actually at the hour. It's been such a wonderful conversation. The time has flown by. I just want to say thank you to my colleagues at the Lilly Family School, LaKoya Rochelle, Director of Programs for the Mays Institute, Amy Conley, and all of our faculty, students, and staff who've made this event possible, and also to our funder and sponsor, the Lumina Foundation, for helping support this work. And finally, Natalye, it's been a pleasure spending part of the day with you. Thank you for all that you do in the sector, and look forward to continuing this conversation, hopefully in person at some point. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.